The Kurdish city of Duhok in northern Iraq has seen little peace. Throughout the 8-year war with Iran, the city was regularly shelled. And this house was destroyed by an American bomb during the Gulf War. There were no military targets evident in Duhok. Rashid Mustafa lost his wife and eldest daughter in the explosion. His 10 children were injured.
After they hit me the bomb, and I feel that I am very tired, and I cannot live with these children because we have no more eating, no more milk for these children. Cannot see my children because all of them cry, and I also cry.
And then for a few short days, it appeared that a new order and hope had arrived in the city of Duhok. On the 14th of March, the Kurdish people rose up against Saddam. The constant fear and suspicion had been erased. Saddam's brutal reign had been beaten. But the Intifada, as the Kurds have come to call their revolution, was a deceptively easy battle. The war-weary Iraqi army had all but lost the will to fight. The Gulf War had weakened the Iraqi command structure. During the Iran-Iraq War, Saddam had armed all Kurdish males, making the rebellion even easier.
چکداراجی عراق همین بو تقریبا شعب عراقی همین چکدار کرد بوشلای خاص بو چکدار کردن قبل نظام عراقی و دقال هاتنا فرصه اوان چکدار همین ملک ملئیک.
So far, the Kurds had little need to use their guns. With massive desertions from the local Kurdish military forces, the remaining Iraqis simply packed their bags and left, leaving much of their hardware behind. There were few Kurds in the Iraqi army who would fight against their own people.
از المدفعية بهم وبشتي ما إعلانها إزجي يقولي بوي بيشمرجي دوستاندي أم شش كز وهر شش يبرد بامن ما اتصال قال من قرط بيشمرجي كيرو أم هر شش وقافي نقيب يعني جيشي دا بل نقيب والجيشي دا وقان جيشنا بيشمرجي وأم هر شش آماده أم هر شش وقافي الجبهة بيشمرجي.
The destruction evident throughout the city might seem the aftermath of major battles. It is in fact the work of jubilant Kurds destroying all signs of Saddam. The officials from these party offices escaped long before the building was ravaged. They suspected a rebellion was about to occur. Shortly before the uprising, an official Iraqi security document was distributed. It indicates some of the reasons behind the mass exodus of the local population a few days later. It instructs the security forces to eliminate 95% of those rising against Saddam and the Ba'ath Party. The hated security police, responsible for implementing such instructions, were eagerly sought out and captured. Here, incarcerated in their own prisons, they await an uncertain fate. When questioned by the Peshmerga about the security police document, Iraqi security police captain Falin Mustafa admitted knowledge of the order.
هذا بالنسبة للتعميم عام على كل مديريات القطر يعني أي تظاهرة معادية ضد الحزب حزب البعث أو ضد صدام حسين جاء أمر بأنه تباد 95 منا بالمظاهرة ويبقون 5% لإجراء التحقيق معهم.
There is evidence everywhere of the brutality suffered by the Kurdish people at the hands of the Iraqi government security forces. In buildings like this, thousands of Kurdish families were kept. They were arrested for living in rebellious regions or for the crime of a distant family member. Thousands of Kurdish families raise their children in such places.
وحيالي واجرت ناس جات في قلعه ودور منظور حازنا نزاد دا ناف دا مدشش حضر رجاكا تقى تعذيب دانو والرزالات بوشيت كر
افتش تذا قبل ما قلت همي بسري مبخويت هاتي يعني نكو مبجاوت خودي دينا أنا كيبو مقولتينا في رنجي أسبخوية تعذيب داي وقالك جرا شيخ سما كارب بركاربه وحتى بشتيكو حكم بينه چونه أبو غريب مدة سالة كيجي هشتا أسناد بمسرخو وأسناد شام باش درست هاي بريفبج.
Though the world applauded the rebellion of the Kurds against Saddam, it was not nearly so eager to take an active part in their war. At harbour border crossing into Turkey, the departing Iraqis had blown up the bridge, knowing that any link between Turkey and the Kurds would be vital to the survival of the Kurdish rebellion. But Turkish authorities and the West refused to come up with a solution to their dilemma. The seriousness of the situation was gradually dawning on the Kurdish leadership.
Everybody is talking about necessary supplies for the bare existence. When today I made a speech here before the public, when I said there are hopes that the international community will deliver food supplies very soon, the crowd was over enthusiastic because they need things and they are a bit afraid if the supplies go down to zero.
Only Syria opened the border over the Tigris River, allowing small quantities of arms to reach the Peshmerga. But more importantly, she allowed the world's media to cross into northern Iraq.
Welcome to Kurdistan. Thank you.
Within a few days, nearly 150 international journalists entered into the newly liberated Kurdish regions. Through the journalists, the Kurds believed the world would hear their pleas and recognize the horrors they would suffer should Saddam be allowed to retake Kurdistan. But even before the first pictures began to arrive in the West, critical shortages had begun to signal time was running out. These chickens were the last meat to be sold in Duhok. An element of panic had begun to infect the local population. Early on, long queues stretched from petrol outlets. To maintain the supply of troops and ammunition to the front lines, stocks of fuel were vital. When the Iraqis departed, they had left little behind, having themselves suffered acute shortages. As word spread that the Iraqis were massing for a concerted push to regain the north, the isolated Kurds could only wait for the expected onslaught. As unwanted pawns on a larger political chessboard, their fate was almost predetermined. Then at 8 a.m. on March the 3rd, everything changed in the city of Duhok. For the first time, the Iraqis shelled the city itself. 5 shells rained down, killing 1 and injuring 7. Bloody faces like this were all that was needed to break the back of Duhok's rebellion. Even in the hospital wards, organization began to crumble. This dead woman left to lie with other patients. To the people of Duhok, the attack signaled the end of their brief freedom. Within an hour, they were packing their belongings and streaming from the city to escape Saddam's revenge. Every means of transport was employed, even Duhok's fire engine. On the streets, tension began to erupt as the escaping population used cars, essential for the war effort. Peshmerga refused to recognize the catastrophe that was occurring. For them, it was more difficult to abandon their newly freed homeland.
دهوك أكثرية باجرة كردستان جي همي متعود إنه بظن جيكو روجانا طوب بردوام طوب بيت كافن طياراتنا سرا وبخوجي بلكي آثار جالك قصف ديتينو برينو كاجيب شوفت خوي ديتيو قصف باجر رجل نجمة تشتكي نجملات ماجي بويا تشتكي عتيادي بس شلب كان اگر جنا اگر بچي که احتمال هي تحملنا كد جي خوب على الاقل جي خوب وجوزيتون افقل ك استوقعنا كمش باجر دهوك.
But by the following day, the city of Duhok was all but deserted. On the front lines beyond the city, the shelling had intensified, though there was still little to indicate that Duhok was about to fall to the Iraqis. Then a rainstorm that night brought with it a cascade of Iraqi shells, conventional and phosphorus, lobbed across the mountains. It was the deciding factor for most of the remaining Kurds.
They are rockets.
In the early hours of the following morning, the city under massive bombardment, the last of Duhok's people headed to the mountains and safety. Behind them, they left everything they owned, their homes, their lives.
My father is here. See, all the children, women. George Bush, why don't you interfere in this? God help us.
The helicopters Bush promised would never be allowed to attack circled above, firing at the fleeing refugees whenever the Peshmerga fired RPG rockets. At a Desta attack, 100 kilometers from Duhok, 25,000 tired and weary people congregated across the river from Turkey. Nobody believed the Turks wouldn't allow them to pass. Across the river in Turkey, border guards patrol constantly. At the military base above, helicopters buzzed as Turkish authorities arrived to assess the situation. Then leaflets were dropped warning the Kurds they would not be given permission to cross into Turkey.
Turkey said will never let anybody to cross the river, to cross to the other side. And if anybody wants to cross, maybe they will shoot him.
ونوكا مخرب عالم خرج جايت كانش دولات أوروبية تدخلت كدن بحال ما خلاص كدن بحالي شيء بخوف شيء لجوء سياسي تركي بيتن أف عالم بخود أرباز بيتن شيء علاج كده بكن هوري ما بكن مال بظالمي خلاص كان.
The 60-kilometer march that followed through treacherous mountain terrain finally brought the refugees to a remote mountain pass on the Turkish border. There they felt safely removed from Saddam's weapons. How long they remain on the border is up to the world. Unless a long-term solution can be found to solve the tragedy that is Kurdish history, the Kurds will continue to suffer.